The world is watching oil prices surge past $126 a barrel as the Strait of Hormuz effectively closes. This is the crisis you see. But what if this isn't the real story? What if it's simply a massive distraction from a more profound strategic shift happening right here in Canada? While our government publicly states its massive F-35 purchase is on hold, it is simultaneously quietly continuing to buy key components for that very program. This analysis will provide a clear, evidence-based framework for interpreting these moves and what they signal for Canada's future. Yet, before we dissect this contradiction, we must first understand the world we were told we lived in, the foundational consensus that is now cracking just beneath the surface. That contradiction over the F-35 makes no sense unless you understand the world it was supposed to exist in. For decades, the strategic architecture was clear and mostly unspoken. The operating system of global security was American. Stability was the product, and allies like Canada were premium subscribers. Publicly, we talked about sovereign defense policy, diversified partners, and procurement that would build domestic industry, even as our decisions kept tracing the same line back to Washington. This arrangement wasn't born from weakness, but from a pragmatic calculation. In exchange for aligning our security policy, we gained access to cutting-edge military technology, the stability underwritten by the superpower, and the promise of seamless interoperability in any coalition fight. The logic was, on its surface, sound. But what exactly did that lock us into? This dependence was never just theoretical. It was wired into how we plan and fight. From NORAD's binational command structure to U.S.-led supply chains, our air defense and logistics have been built to plug into American systems by default. The F-35 fighter jet was designed as the technological spine of Western air power, built so allied squadrons could plug into the same software and sensors. If you wanted to fly with the pack, you bought into that spine. The financial footprint makes the pattern visible. Over recent decades, roughly 70% of Canadian defense spending has flowed to American contractors and U.S.-made systems, embedding that dependency in capital programs year after year. Ottawa sold it as efficient access to scale and industry benefits. In practice, it kept our most critical capabilities tethered to a single supplier ecosystem. That world built on American security and technology wasn't just a gentleman's agreement. Its centerpiece, the F-35 program, carries long-range cost projections near $2 trillion over its lifetime across the United States and its allies. And the single most expensive piece of that foundation is breaking. The foundation of that world is a single $2 trillion promise that the F-35 would be the central nervous system and spine of Allied air power for the next half-century. Not just another fighter, but a revolutionary networked super platform knitting Western squadrons into one digital battle space. That is the narrative our government sold to their publics. The internal record looks very different. The U.S. Government Accountability Office, the GAO, in report GAO 25-7632 released in September 2020, now projects the program's lifetime cost will exceed $2 trillion, with $485 billion just to acquire the jets. And inside the Pentagon, its Director of Operational Test and Evaluation, the DOTNE, reported in March 2026 that the software upgrade meant to unlock the jet's next wave of combat functions was predominantly unusable through most of 2023, delivering no new combat capability. This is not speculation or media chatter. These are the U.S. government's own official evaluations. When the outside auditor and the Pentagon's own test authority line up like that, the gap between promise and reality becomes impossible to ignore. The core of that failure is Technology Refresh 3, or TR3. Think of TR-3 as a new operating baseline for the F-35's brain, the combination of software and associated upgrades that everything else is supposed to rest on. It is the gateway to the jet's most advanced combat and networking functions, the software you need to bring new sensors, weapons, and data sharing modes online. Without a stable TR-3, the aircraft cannot actually field the next round of capabilities that were used to justify its extraordinary cost. According to the March 2026 DOT&E report, that gateway simply does not work reliably. The upgrade was predominantly unusable for most of 2025 because of chronic stability problems. A fighter designed to be a flying sensor hub and battle manager ends up flying in practice with its next generation nervous system switched off. This is where the scale matters. $2 trillion is not just a line item in Washington. It represents how the United States and its allies have structured their air forces, training pipelines, basing infrastructure, and future budgets around the assumption that the F-35 would deliver a step change in capability. Many countries retired or deferred upgrades to other fleets on the understanding that this one aircraft would do more, see farther, connect faster, coordinate better. Yet, as of the latest DOT&E report, the systems meant to provide that edge have not been delivered into stable operational use. On paper, the alliance has bought into a 21st century superfighter. In the cockpit, pilots are often flying something much closer to an upgraded legacy jet because the most sophisticated functions are still locked behind an unreliable software layer. And this is not a distant theoretical risk. It is shaping operations today. The DOT&E confirms that because TR-3 is unstable, frontline F-35s on sensitive missions are being flown using the previous technology Refresh 2 software. That includes aircraft operating in and around high-tension airspace near Iran. In other words, some of the newest, most expensive jets in the world are not using the upgrade that was supposed to define their combat value because it cannot yet be trusted. The same report notes that dedicated operational testing for the new systems has slipped yet again, now pushed toward mid to late 2020 with no firm assurance. For commanders planning real-world missions, that means living with a moving target. A fleet whose advertised capabilities exist mainly in briefings and brochures, not as stable tools you can base a risk calculation on. For allies who have bet their air forces on this platform, the implications are stark. You have committed a decade of procurement and industrial policy to a jet sold as the digital backbone of coalition warfare. You have accepted deep interoperability with the United States on the assumption that its flagship system will work as promised. Yet in practice, you are fielding squadrons whose cutting-edge functions are postponed into an indefinite future schedule of fixes and retests. The strategic risk is not just that the F-35 underperforms in a crisis, it is that entire Allied air plans, force structures, munitions choices, training for joint operations have been built around capabilities that are not actually available today. If you're responsible for national defense planning, you now have to ask, how many years can you wait for that gap to close? And what is your exposure if it does not? A broken software baseline can eventually be rewritten, retested, and stabilized. That is a technical problem, and technical problems, given enough money and time, tend to yield. The harder problem is what this does to trust. When the most expensive weapons program in history delivers cost without capability, allies start running quiet calculations about diversification, national fighter projects, alternative suppliers, different forms of cooperation. This is the opening step in a broader strategic leverage cascade, away from automatic dependence on Washington. In the next chapter, we will track how that shift is already showing up in alliance behavior. A trend one world leader diagnosed years ago as the brain death of NATO itself. That diagnosis, the brain death of the alliance, was made in 2019 by French President Emmanuel Macron. It wasn't hyperbole. It was a clinical assessment made after the United States, under President Trump, abruptly pulled troops from Syria without consulting a single ally on the ground. Macron saw it for what it was, a neurological event in the command structure of the West. The guarantor could no longer be fully relied upon. Now connect that political volatility to the technological failure we just examined with the F-35. When the fighter that was sold as the interoperable backbone of the alliance cannot reliably deliver, and the political leadership of its primary supplier is seen as unpredictable, the entire security guarantee becomes a calculated risk. And what happens when that trust erodes? Responsible nations begin to build parallel structures. This is no longer a theory. It is a documented strategic shift. On March 15th, 2026, leaders met in Oslo to discuss defense industrial cooperation. Around the table were Canada and 5 Nordic countries, Norway, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, and Sweden. Their joint statement committed to deepening defense industrial cooperation. This was not a headline-grabbing summit. It was a quiet, pragmatic session between partners in a high-risk environment. Publicly, these same governments still stand up beside American presidents and talk about unshakable unity and ironclad guarantees. Privately, the United States was, in the carefully chosen words of the official communiqué, notably absent. That absence is not an act of defiance. It is strategic risk management. It is what you do when your primary insurance provider's future is uncertain. And this was not an isolated event. Earlier that same year, Canada formally ratified its participation in the European Union's €150 billion security instrument, SAFE. We became the first non-European country to join, a clear move to diversify our security portfolio away from total reliance on American systems. These are the quiet actions that speak louder than any public statement of unity. Oslo and SAFE sit alongside NATO rather than replacing it, but in design they function as insurance if those public assurances ever fail. That is the real gap between the official narrative and the facts on the ground. This is the paradoxical effect of the past decade. When a U.S. president threatens tariffs against allies, muses about buying Greenland, and openly questions NATO commitments, it signals that even core alliances are negotiable. The rational response is to hedge, to explore strategic autonomy through exactly the kinds of arrangements we now see in Northern Europe and in Brussels. Macron's diagnosis of brain death was simply the first blunt admission that the alliance's center of gravity was shifting and that others would have to learn to carry more of their own weight. The Oslo summit is a clear example of allies charting their own course. Beyond the military sphere, what is another area where you have seen countries quietly reducing their dependence on a single major power? Share your insights in the comments below. So the foundation is cracked and the alliance is fracturing. All this fragile system needed was an outside shock to accelerate the collapse. And in early 2026, that shock arrived, not in a diplomatic cable, but as a crisis that shut down 20% of the world's daily oil supply and fundamentally changed the balance of power. That crisis materialized in late February 2026. After a sharp military escalation between the U.S. and Israel, Iran imposed a full blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. A U.S. Congressional Research Service report put a hard number on it. Roughly 1/5 of the world's daily oil supply suddenly fell out of normal circulation. Within days, prices spiked. Tankers were rerouted or stranded. Governments drew on strategic reserves, and import-dependent states quietly pressed Washington for guarantees. That was no longer a scenario exercise. It was a supply chain emergency. When 20% of global oil is at risk, advantage shifts to producers whose barrels avoid contested choke points. And shipping distance, pipeline routes, rail capacity, and shared power grids suddenly matter more than abstract diversification plans. And on that map, Canada is hard to ignore. A large, stable neighbor tied to the U.S. by pipelines, rail corridors, and an integrated electricity market. This is where that chessboard was reset. For decades, Washington treated Canada as convenient and secondary. But in a disrupted world, that assumption turned into a liability. As analyst Fen Osler-Hampson noted, U.S. decision makers were forced to reassess their approach, viewing Canada through the practical realities of supply and demand in a disrupted world. That reassessment surfaced less in speeches than in internal briefs and calls. Energy security models that once centered on the Persian Gulf and global spot markets were rerun with Canadian oil and natural gas as core assumptions. Trade officials preparing for the ICUSMA review started asking different questions. How specific tariff rules, regulatory standards, and dispute tools might affect the flow of Canadian hydrocarbons, aluminum, and potash into the U.S. economy. The stable supply of Canadian commodities was no longer a convenience. It had quietly become a critical U.S. national interest, yet in public leaders in Washington and Ottawa stayed with familiar lines about fair trade, diversification, and climate ambition. Behind closed doors, the tone was more blunt. The questions were about volumes and timelines, how much additional capacity Canadian producers could bring on, how quickly it could move through existing pipelines and rail, and what regulatory flexibility or trade assurances would keep that flow predictable. The timing of that shift could not have been more consequential. CUSMA has a mandatory joint review starting July 1st, 2026. For the first time in a generation, Canada would enter those talks not as the junior partners preserving access, but as a supplier the United States could not casually alienate. In practical terms, that gives Ottawa more room to test U.S. red lines on issues that shape long-term autonomy, investment protections, dispute settlement, and how future rules might touch cross-border energy and resource flows. Leverage born of crisis fades as markets adjust and attention moves on. So the strategic test for Canada is whether this short window of bargaining power can be converted into a lasting change in how it is treated by its closest ally. How do you turn a moment of forced dependence into a more durable state of sovereign choice? That demands a new playbook, a systematic way of flipping the old dependency logic. In this series, we call that framework the Strategic Leverage Cascade. This framework, the Strategic Leverage Cascade, is our model for turning that temporary advantage into permanent sovereignty. It unfolds as a 3-stage cascade. Each stage forces the next, and if we stop the flow at any point, the leverage bleeds away. Stage 1 is crisis to leverage, global technological failures, political instability in Washington, and supply chain shocks suddenly make reliable resource producers like Canada indispensable. Stage 2 is leverage to investment. We use that indispensability to pull processing, manufacturing, and capital onto Canadian soil. Stage 3 is investment to sovereignty, a rebuilt industrial base that can meet our own defense needs and buffer us from the next round of external shocks. Stage 1, the crisis to leverage shift, is already visible. Publicly, leaders talk about shared values, alliance unity, and interoperable capabilities in the wake of the F-35's economic and performance failures. Quietly, defense planners and industry are doing something much more practical, remapping supply chains around a short list of trusted, resource-rich states. That is where Canada's position changes. The same global disruptions that expose the fragility of high-tech platforms have made our critical minerals, stable institutions, and predictable rule of law far more valuable than they were a decade ago. The cascade starts there, with allies needing what we control. Canada's first deliberate move in this cascade is stage 2, leverage to investment. It begins with a calculated fusion of 2 core policies, the critical minerals strategy and the new defense industrial strategy. On the podium, this shows up as language about aligning economic and security priorities and supporting allied resilience. Behind that, the operating manual is simpler. We are wiring our resource advantage directly into our defense industrial planning. For decades, Canada effectively owned the oil field, but sold the crude to others. With the Strategic Leverage Cascade, we are finally building our own refinery, our own chemical plant, and our own network of gas stations right beside it. We stop being just a shipper of ore and become a producer of finished capability. Instead of exporting leverage and importing vulnerability, we start capturing the full value of what we already own. This is not an abstract ambition. Stage 2 is already being funded. Canada is already a dominant supplier of the raw materials critical for Allied defense, producing 10 of the 12 minerals officially designated as defense critical by NATO. The February 2026 Defense Industrial Strategy takes that fact and turns it into industrial policy, allocating $443 million specifically for domestic processing technologies and for establishing joint Allied stockpiles on Canadian soil. On paper, those dollars are described as contributions to collective security and shared supply assurance. Functionally, they do something more pointed. They convert crisis-driven resource leverage into concrete plans, expertise, and inventory that sit inside Canada's borders. Stage 2 of the cascade is the moment when speeches about solidarity translate into equipment, facilities, and stockpiles we can actually touch. That quiet shift deepens alliances, but on geography and timelines we control. Stage 3, investment to sovereignty, is the destination the strategy now names out loud. The same defense industrial strategy sets a clear aim. Flip our dependency on its head. Today, roughly 70% of Canada's defense spending flows to U.S. suppliers. The target is a future where 70% of our defense needs are met by domestic production. The document backs that shift with $6.6 billion in new funding for Canada's defense industrial base. Publicly, this is framed as modernizing our contribution to NATO and ensuring interoperability with key allies. In practice, it is about building a sovereign industrial base that can keep the Canadian forces equipped even if U.S. politics lurches or a flagship platform like the F-35 underperforms or is grounded. Stage 3 locks in the cascade. Once high-value production, skilled labor, and intellectual property are rooted here, the next crisis strengthens our autonomy instead of threatening it. This shift from a 70% dependency to a 70% domestic target is more than an economic adjustment. It is a deliberate move from being a branch plant in someone else's arsenal to being an architect of our own security ecosystem. When alliances are anchored in domestic capability rather than purchase dependence, the balance of trust changes as well. And it forces us to ask an entirely new question for this new era of global power. If we finally hold our own leverage, what kind of country do we choose to be with it? We began this analysis in a world defined by a simple premise: stable American leadership and clear, predictable dependencies. Then we watched the cracks appear. Not in loud declarations, but in the quiet erosion of trust, fueled by broken technological promises and alliances that began hedging their bets. From those cracks, a new reality has emerged. The strategic leverage cascade is no longer a theory. It is the pattern we have watched play out across this episode. We saw it in the F-35's promised dominance versus its real technological failures and exorbitant costs, and in allies signing communiques while quietly building backup alliances. That shift forces us to confront something that, until recently, would have sounded unthinkable. In a world where alliances define strength, what happens when those alliances begin planning their future without the one country that once held them together? This is where Canada's choice becomes unavoidable. Our problem is no longer, how do we align? It is this: with new leverage in our hands, what kind of world will Canada choose to help build? And what will we refuse to trade away just to stay on someone else's script? If tracking these hidden shifts in power helps you think about Canada's future, subscribe so you don't miss the next framework we build for navigating them. And add your answer in the comments, because protecting Canada's strategic autonomy depends on more of us seeing the game, not just the headlines.